Chapter 564, Sword 1. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. Elder Xuanzhi noticed Zhang Ruotian's distress and assumed he had demoralized him too much. He was about to console him, but Zhang Ruotian, looking very solemn, instead gave a sigh. Sword 1 is very difficult to understand. Your disciple is too dull-witted. I could only comprehend 3/10 of it. Elder Xuanzhi was stunned. What? He had looked through it once, and was able to understand 3/10 of the contents. Elder Xuanzhi himself had not even understood 1/10 of it when he first read through Sword 1. He called himself dull-witted, after comprehending 3/10 of the book. This boy deserved a thrashing. Elder Xuanzhi sized Zhang Ruotian up carefully and asked in disbelief, "You're certain you understand almost a third of it?" Zhang Ruotian said, "I understood only 3/10 of its contents." "Why are you so surprised?" Elder Xuanzhi knew Zhang Ruotian would not lie. He could only sigh inwardly to himself. This youngest disciple had such astoundingly high endowments in sword skill. Elder Xuanzhi stroked his white beard and smiled. "If you could understand 3/10 of Sword 1, your level of understanding surpasses that of many half-saints. But it only means you are highly qualified to practice the Tao of the Sword. It doesn't mean you will necessarily master Sword 1. Understanding is just the first step. Only by mastering Sword 1 can you achieve the beginner level of a sword practitioner." Only now did Zhang Ruotian realize his achievement. It must be quite some feat for him to have understood 3/10 of Sword 1. But what Master said was reasonable. To understand the manual completely was not a big deal. The true achievement was to master it. Zhang Ruotian said, "You said that many half-saints can't understand Sword 1. Does this mean that only someone in the half-saint realm can successfully master Sword 1? "Not really," Elder Xuanzhi replied. "If you are talented enough, you can master Sword 1 even in the Fish-Dragon realm. Then by the time you attain the half-saint realm, you could start practicing Sword 2. Zhang Ruotian asked curiously, "There's a Sword 2? "Of course." Elder Xuanzhi nodded. Sword 1 represents oneself, while Sword 2 represents the yin and the yang. After that comes Sword 3, Sword 4. After mastering each sword manual, a monk's understanding of the Tao of the Sword rises to a whole new level. Zhang Ruotian continued asking questions like a schoolboy. "What do you mean by oneself? What do you mean by the yin and the yang?" Elder Xuanzhi shook his head. "I can't teach such interpretations. You can only comprehend them yourself. All I can tell you is that unless you master Sword 1, you can't be considered a true sword practitioner. Your fifth senior sister is highly gifted in the Tao of the Sword 2, but she has practiced for several decades and has barely reached the beginner level of Sword 2. Don't yearn for higher manuals at this level. Master Sword 1 first. That will help augment your actual strength." Zhang Ruotian recalled the sword skill mantra fifth senior sister had recited when she defeated the Ember Colin in the Xuanwu primitive world. He repeated it now. "The two keys of yin-yang divide the heaven and the earth. The natural Tao of the sword is the destination of all practices." This was the verbal formula that fifth senior sister apprentice had recited. Elder Xuanzhi said, "Yes. That's a formula used in Sword 2. Zhang Ruotian could not help gripping Sword 1 tighter in his hands. "I will surely master Sword 1 in the Fish-Dragon realm," Elder Xuanzhi said with a laugh. "You must know that in the past 1,000 years, only 34 people have mastered Sword 1 in the Fish-Dragon realm." Zhang Ruotian asked, "Are you one of them?" "Yes." Elder Xuanzhi looked rather proud of himself. After all, to have mastered Sword 1 at the Fish-Dragon realm was no mean feat. In addition, he continued, among the 34, there were 2 who also mastered Sword 2 in the Fish-Dragon realm. Zhang Ruotian had seen the contents of Sword 1. He knew how profound and abstruse it was. One could deduce that Sword 2 would be even more extraordinary. To master Sword 1 was already exceedingly difficult. To think that people had managed to master Sword 2 in the Fish-Dragon realm. Could it be him? Someone from 800 years ago materialized in Zhang Ruotian's mind. He was one of the 9 emperors. And Elder Xuanzhi's words indeed confirmed Zhang Ruotian's guess. Elder Xuanzhi said, "The 2 people were the Sword Emperor and Empress Kaiyao. I don't expect you to match them. I would be most content if you could master Sword 1 in the Fish-Dragon realm." The name Sword Emperor reverberated in Zhang Ruotian's ears like thunder. Zhu Hongqian, the true Sword Emperor, was the son of Fragrance City's governor. Matchless in talent and sword technique, he was also a most debonair figure. At the age of 36, he had surpassed his father, the city governor of Fragrance City, and become the world-renowned Sword Saint Hongqian. He later attained higher and higher achievements in the Tao of the Sword, finally hitting an unsurpassable realm. He became the Sword Emperor of his era. And Zhu Hongqian was the youngest of the 9 emperors. The reason Emperor Ming had given his son the name Zhang Yuochen was because he had wanted him to emulate Sword Emperor Zhu Hongqian's outstanding achievements. A saying had circulated in Kunlun's field during that time: just as Sword Saint Hongqian mocks the red dust, one's own son ought to be like Zhu Hongqian. Although Zhang Yuochen had not met the Sword Emperor, the latter had been his role model since boyhood. So when he heard Elder Xuanji's second mention of the Sword Emperor, Zhang Yuochen could not resist asking, "Master, what realm did the Sword Emperor attain during his time?" Elder Xuanji looked to the distance. A hitherto unknown but yearning look appeared in his eyes. "The Sword Emperor hasn't appeared in Kunlun's field for many years. No one knows what heights he has attained. But I've heard that he mastered Sword 10 800 years ago. Others say that he has cultivated Sword 11. There are many rumors, yet no one knows what realm he has truly reached." Zhang Yuochen asked again, "So which realm do you need to reach before one would regard you as a Sword Saint?" "You must master at least Sword 7, only then could you be considered a Sword Saint." Zhang Yuochen was somewhat astonished. "You mean only 3 people have managed to master Sword 7 in the entire eastern region?" "Yes." Elder Xuanji sighed and remarked, "So don't feel disappointed even if you fail to master Sword 1 in the Fish Dragon realm. It's just a hope of mine." Zhang Yuochen and Elder Xuanji continued discussing the wordless sword manual. It wasn't until nightfall that Zhang Yuochen left the Lingpe Garden with the Sword 1 manual. He walked out of the Saint Academy towards the Avenue of Kings. The half-saint mansion Kong Laniu had given him was situated on the Avenue of Kings. Zhang Yuochen walked along the middle of the main street, rife with busy traffic. His mind was still trying to unravel Sword 1. He had reached a stage of crazy obsession. His eyes fixed blankly ahead, and all sorts of thoughts crept into his brain. Before he knew it, he had arrived in front of his mansion. He pushed the door open and walked in. Swish! He had barely entered through the door when the noise of a sword resounded. A piercing sword chi broke through the air. A white streak of sword radiance, 2 fingers wide, could be seen above Zhang Yuochen's eyes. The sword radiance was dazzling. Zhang Yuochen could not help but shut his eyes. Glang! Sensing danger, the ancient abyss sword flew out of the sword scabbard by itself. Zhang Yuochen reacted almost instinctively. His finger pointing forward, the ancient abyss sword arced its way towards the foot of a grove shade to the left of the gate. Boom! A loud noise resounded. The ancient abyss sword fell down. The other person's sword had broken into 2. With a clang, Zhang Yuochen opened his eyes and was about to thrust his sword forward when he suddenly discovered the assailant was a little girl of just 5 or 6. It was Hanzhu. She stood under the tree holding a broken sword in her hands. Her small, tender and fair hands were dripping with blood. Holding back her pain, she stepped back swiftly. In a flash, Zhang Yuochen recovered himself. He quickly controlled the heart of the sword and recalled the ancient abyss sword back into its scabbard. "Hanzhu, what are you doing here?" He dashed forward to examine her injury. Although it had only been a random thrust, his sword strike contained remarkable power. Hanzhu was too young to withstand the power of Zhang Yuochen's strike. Fortunately, the ancient abyss sword had only slashed her sword into 2. The perlicule on her right hand had ruptured from the blow, but it was nothing serious. She was not crying either. She pursed her lips and said in a pitiful voice, "Master, what were you thinking? You exerted so much force you could have killed me." "Sorry, I was so deep in my swordplay comprehension that I didn't realize it was you. By the way, why did you ambush me?" Zhang Yuochen stretched out his hand and pressed it on her wrist. He injected a flow of genuine qi into her hand meridians, trying to aid her recovery. But he realized that even before his genuine qi had injected into her meridians, The wound on her wrist had begun to close by itself. How did that happen? Even Zhang Yuochen with the dragon pearl in his body could not heal himself as well as she did. In a moment, her wound had healed. There wasn't even a scar. More to his astonishment, Zhang Yuochen's sword strike had only severed her sword. The shattering force had not made her drop her sword. Her hands were still gripping onto the broken sword tightly. One ought to remember that she was not even 6. Her level of cultivation was shockingly outrageous. How powerful her thousand bones physical quality is, truly remarkable. Zhang Yuochen reflected. Hanzu revealed her gleaming white teeth and her eyes fluttered. Sister Yanjin visited Master's mansion and told me that you have returned to the East Region Saint City. I wanted to show you my recent practice achievements. That's why I ambushed you on purpose. But my cultivation is too low. I can't match yours level at all. Do you think I'm a good for nothing, Master? With these words Hanzu bowed her head, looking very distraught. Zhang Yuochen shook his head, smiling. He extended an arm and caressed her head, saying, if you are considered useless, there aren't any useful people in the world. And oh, why did your sister Yanjin call? Hanzu addressed Zhang Yuochen as master, but Huang Yanjin as elder sister. It was really quite odd. But Zhang Yuochen did not ask her why. He was more curious about the purpose of Huang Yanjin's visit. Hanzu shook her little head and bent her fingers. I don't know. I saw Sister Yanjin with a middle-aged uncle. When I was with them, they kept mentioning things like bridal gifts, guests and marriage pledge. Anyway, I didn't quite get it. Zhang Yuochen's expression turned solemn. He understood the probable intention of Huang Yanjin's visit. He walked into the courtyard, holding on to Hanzu's small hand.